I am here today with Russell Masse, a Navy veteran who served during the Persian Gulf War. So, Mr. Masse, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, 1971.
All right. What did your parents do for a living?
My mom was a homemaker, and my dad was a collator for a paper mill type area.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
I have two older sisters and two adopted younger brothers.
Mm. So, did anyone else in your family serve in the military?
Not my immediate family, but I have uncles who have served in the military.
Which wars?
There's two uncles that were Marines in the Vietnam War.
I see. So what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was a high school senior.
I see. So we've already answered what branch of the military you've served in.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when you enlisted? Or did you enlist?
I enlisted. I was 18 when I left high school, and by the time I got to boot camp, I was 19.
All right. So why did you choose the Navy?
For a couple of reasons. I saw myself down the road as being either a helicopter pilot or a fixed-wing pilot, but I also wanted to venture down to the SEALs. And unfortunately, I didn't qualify for either one. So.
You know, that's just how it all turns out, I guess. Yeah. So, do you recall your first days of service?
A little bit.
What was it like?
Well, let's see, I left Pawtucket at 4 a.m. in the morning. I went up to Boston to do all the paperwork, and then from Boston, went down to Orlando, Florida for basic training, and we got down there roughly at midnight on July 6th, so I was up all for like 24 hours. And then we had to do more paperwork, and then I didn't finally get to, paperwork. Then we had to get our clothes, then we went for breakfast at 8, and then we had to take a couple tests after breakfast. And the tests were hard because it mainly is sleep deprivation. The test wasn't really hard, it was just doing them with sleep deprivation. Because we didn't sleep for like almost 48 hours. And I still didn't sleep after that until lights out was at 9 o'clock that next night. So.
I see. So, do you recall any of your instructors?
Not really by name, but I did have some pictures at the house of the instructors. My particular squad went through 2 sets of drill instructors.
I see. What were they like?
The first 2 weren't really that good, because that's why we had to switch to the other 2, because those 2 guys got fired. So these 2 guys, the other 2 took over, and after that it was pretty good.
Mm. Did you get through it all right?
Yeah.
So, did you receive any specialized training?
After basic training, we went to what's called A school. That's where you get the training for your particular job that you are doing. I was undesignated at the time because my other 2 adventures didn't pan out. So the other part of the base, Orlando base, was where we did our first set of classes to learn what it would be like on a day in the life on an aircraft carrier. And then from there we went to Lemoore, California to continue the training to work with F-818 Hornets. So, and then we went over to Japan after that.
I see. So how did you adapt to the military life?
I was always very militant as I was growing up, so it was very easy for me to adapt.
I see. So would you say that you had enough supplies, things you needed, etc.?
Yes.
Okay.
I could have used a couple more brownies from my family, but
Don't we all? Don't we all? So, was there anything special you did during your time for good luck? Any like mantras, routines, stuff like that?
not really at that particular time. I really didn't get into those self-awareness type routines until I got to the aircraft carrier. And I would always spend, before I went to bed or right after flight ops, I would always spend about 15, 20 minutes sitting by myself, either in the front, the bow or the stern of the boat, just in darkness watching the stars.
I see. So, where did you serve exactly?
My home port was in Japan. It was in Yokosuka and then in Atsugi. I was on the USS Midway at that time. Then our service was actually out at sea. We would spend anywhere from 4 to 6 months out on a stretch out at sea.
So, what was your assignment?
Let's see, the first year and a half of my service, I launched the F/A-18s that flew over Kuwait during the war.
I see.
And then after that, I loaded the bombs on those planes,
Oh,
which was aviation ordnance.
all right. So, do you remember arriving in that area of the world?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I said, we were in Japan. It was right around early December. We left Japan and we went all the way around. We landed in the country, the United Arab Emirates. And then from there we took a little plane to Bahrain, and we stayed there for a week, and then we went to Abu Dhabi. So we were like getting used to the environment there, and then we flew out to the boat when they had a flight available for us. I got to the aircraft carrier New Year's Eve, actually.
I see. So, what would you say it was like there?
Like where?
In the places you visited in the area, the Abu Dhabi,
And Bahrain.
Bahrain.
Very desert-like, but they're very clean and very beautiful lands. They weren't violent at that time because they're like the war was actually taking place a couple countries over, so we came kind of into the back door type area. But they were really nice. They looked like they were like, "Why are you guys here?" type things, but for the most part, it was a very beautiful country.
I see. So, could you tell me about some of your more memorable experiences while there?
There's just basic work at that particular time. There really wasn't, well, at one of the hotels I stayed at, I actually saw Bob Hope from a distance. So, I mean, they were doing the USO tour, and I saw him from a distance before I got to the boat. So
I see.
that's somewhat memorable, but not really at that particular time, because it's just all routine stuff.
So, were you ever in live combat at any point?
We were always in live combat. Being in the Navy on an aircraft carrier, I wasn't really directly with boots on the ground type of combat, but we were in that combat all the time. From the time you get up to the time you go to sleep, you're always in general quarters, battle ready. Like I said, I was on the flight deck, so all the planes that did the fighting, I was the one that was in charge of that when it got back to the aircraft carrier for either fuel or for more weapons. I was the one in charge of that particular plane. So, and then we loaded those bombs up later on those planes. So.
Mm. I see. So, did your unit have any casualties? Were any of the planes shot down, damaged?
Not on the Midway. Midway was the only aircraft carrier that came out of the Gulf War without any incidences. After, when we got out of the war zone, we did have a couple accidents or casualties due to operational error aboard the ship. We actually had lost 2 of our pilots. They had to eject off because it was an unsafe launch off a catapult. So we had some of those. One ejected right on off the deck, and then the other one ejected out into the water. So.
All right. So, were you awarded any sort of medal or citations for your service?
I've awarded some basic medals and ribbons, which I have some right over there.
So perhaps you could,
Show them?
yes.
Okay. Can you hold it? Can you hold that in, please?
Yeah, sure.
This is the Southwest Asia medal from, everybody gets that when they go into the Gulf War. National Defense Ribbon and medal, that's all, you also get that. This one here is the Kuwaiti Liberation, and that's the Iraq Defense Ribbon. We have the Meritorious Unit Commendation, the Unit Commendation, the Ballot E, the red one I forgot what that one was about. National Defense, the Southwest Asia with 3 clusters for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and Southern Watch. That's the Overseas Ribbon. There's a bronze star in there because I was in a hostile environment. And this one here is the Sea Service. And then once again you have the Kuwait Liberation and the Iraq. Iraq Defense.
I see. So, what sort of friendships did you form with the other people on the carrier while you were serving?
There was a lot of friendships in there. There is well over 2,000 people on board the ship, so it's hard to meet everybody and to build bonding relationships. But I had a couple friends. One was from Florida, and another one was from Pennsylvania. There are guys in my division that I worked with and supervised over the years. I still don't talk to them, but they were really good friends while out there. So we hung out a lot together.
I see. So how did you stay in touch with your family and friends back home?
Payphone. It was very hard due to the time zone, and because when you're over on the other side of the prime meridian, it's actually a day ahead of where we are now. So I had to calculate it and remember that when I was calling, what time of day it was. I would usually call in the afternoon over in Japan, which would be like dinner time here. So I would make sure, schedule some time. But there were no cell phones, there was no computer, so I just had to use a calling card and a payphone to get in touch. Every once in a while I would write letters. I'm not really a letter type person, so I would always call. So that's how I really basically got in touch with them. Every once in a while the family would send care packages to the ship, and they would do letters and stuff and brownies and that type of stuff in there. and then I sent gifts back home, so, pretty much.
I see. So, what did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
We really weren't off duty that often, but when you have time, it was kind of mandatory to get at least a couple hours of workout in there. Then we also used to like to have like marathon games of volleyball. We did a lot of studying because that's the only way to advance in rank is a lot of studying. And every once in a while you catch a movie at the theater on base.
Mhm.
Basically that would be it.
Okay. So, where were you when the war ended?
When we officially got the word, I was actually coming out of the Indian Ocean. We were out at sea. I was on the Independence, and we were cruising around the water. Then our first stop, I believe, was the Philippines, and then we came back through a bunch of other different ports to Japan, and then I cycled back out to come back to the States to separate into the Philadelphia Naval Air Base, and then came back here after the war.
I see. So, how well were you received by your family when you came back?
My family enjoyed it. Was always surprised when I got back here. When I got back, I really didn't tell them that I was coming back, so it was kind of like a surprise, like, hi, you know. It's always fun to have that type of reaction. But it was good. Yeah.
All right. So, how well do you think that you readjusted to civilian life when you got back?
Adjusted.
Yeah.
At that time, it was all right, because you take some time off, you take leave off to get yourself adjusted. I spent a lot of time just chilling out at the house. The whole regiment, the freedom thing was a new adjustment for it. It was hard to find employment at that time afterward, but it was fairly adjusted fairly well to that at that particular time.
All right. So, did you work or did you go back to school and try to go through college?
I went back to training. I used the GI Bill to put myself through emergency medical technicians training, and then at the emergency medical, cardiac, and paramedic levels.
All right. So, have you remained in contact with your fellow veterans?
No, I have not.
I see. So, you're not a member of any veterans organizations, I assume?
I was briefly for a time, but I'm not really an active member of the VFW post or anything like that.
I see. So, what have you done since you separated with the military?
Worked as a paramedic, starting a business as a massage therapist, trying to get back to the VA to get some medical coverage.
All right.
Just basic, everyday stuff. So.
All right. All right. So, how would you say that your wartime experiences affected your life?
It made me grow up fast and become more independent about myself, not reliant on a lot of family to be around there, so you don't really have that crutch to lean on, so you have to grow up and be more independent on yourself. More regimented, more target-oriented at work, motivated to get the jobs done that was assigned to me. So the respect of the country. Yeah.
Alright. So what would you say that were some life lessons that your service in the Navy taught you?
Pay attention to the details.
I see.
All the way from basic training, signing the paperwork for the contracts, to go into the service, all the way up to the end. Always pay attention to the details.
Alright. So how has your military service, would you say, impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
To read between the lines, make sure that you're actually going, if you're going over to a foreign land to fight, to make sure you're there for a purpose. I always try to listen to the politics, make sure that we are not sending people over there for no apparent reason. I do, if my boys, my kids chose to go into the military, that is one aspect that I will sit down with and have a long discussion for. I always want them to go into the military after college, so that we always go in as an officer, have a little more influence. But our military is, we need to give money and more support to the military, because we have shut down a lot of bases, and we have been having some cutbacks on that. A lot of funds should be geared to that, even though we are considered at peacetime. We should still always remain efficient. I also do believe that every 18-year-old, when they leave high school, they should spend at least 2 years as in the military. That's just due to the fact that I've seen, as a generation to generation, is a lot of respect that is, and family values, they're going away, and the kids are a little more disrespectful, but you could earn that or learn that back if you get to the military. At least if 2 years, if you have 2 years, and everybody starts off at the same plane, and everybody is expected to have the same mentality type area.
I see. So like how they do it in Israel, I believe.
Yes, other countries have it, yes.
I see. So what message would you like to leave for any future generations who would hear or view this video?
Have respect for your government. If you do decide to get into the military, pay attention to the details, watch what you're signing, and keep your head on a swivel.
All right. So is there anything that you feel we haven't discussed or should be added to this video? Is there anything you would like to add as like final few words? All right. How did you feel about the location that you were stationed in, both Japan and the Persian Gulf?
I like Japan better. When we weren't out at sea, that's where our home port would be. So I got to spend a lot of time in Japan. I used to be able to speak the language, but that's falling. The less you use it, the less you know. So, but that was when I first got there, it was a very, very culture shock type thing, because there was nothing written in English. I even took my driver's test over there in Japanese, which was difficult, but I got it. The Persian Gulf, those cities, like I said, they were beautiful. We didn't really spend that much time there, so we didn't get to tour all that stuff. But for being like a desert type country, they were very well kept and well cleaned, and they were pretty good. Other countries, the culture, from this culture to that culture, it's just very strange, but it was interesting to live over there. So I enjoyed Japan very much.
I see. So, did you interact with the locals in any of these places at all?
Oh yeah, you had to. If you had to get from point A to point B, you had to use some of the subway systems, or you drove your car. But the systems there, the street signs, that's all in kanji, so you had to adapt to that. The restaurants, you had to eat somewhere. When you go to the restaurants, all the restaurants they have outside, there's a window that they keep outside. Everything on the menu is always pictured there. So if you couldn't understand the waiter, or the waiter could understand you, he'd take you outside and he'd just point to what you wanted to eat, and that's what you got. Shopping, we did a bunch of shopping out in Japan. The yen rate was the hardest part to get used to, because it always fluctuated from day to day. So you can go out there with a lot of money in your pocket, or very little money in your pocket, depending on what the exchange rate was. Because sometimes the dollar wasn't a dollar. It was less than $1, or it was more than $1. So it was more than $1, it was like, woo-hoo. If it was less than $1, you couldn't buy that much.
So, did you want to join the military ever since you were young?
Yes.
If you were given the choice, would you have made the same decision today?
I probably would have waited to go in the military after college.
I
would
see.
have tried to go to college first.
Right. So, you made a explicit point in mentioning looking at the politics of a war before entering it.
Yes.
So, in your opinion, was the Gulf War justified?
No. That's all politics.
It's okay, go ahead.
We were over there to defend oil. We weren't over there to defend the people. For whether they were, like, in Vietnam, you had one party trying to take over another party. So you were helping a particular party, a group of people out there. In the Persian Gulf War, we were just there to defend oil, to make the rich people richer. That's not really justifiable for my needs.
I see. So, why did you choose to enlist in the first place in any branch of the military?
I always saw myself in being a military person. So when I enlisted, the war wasn't on at that time. We were still at peacetime. The war happened after I enlisted. But I always saw myself as a military person, whether in any branch. I just went and chose the Navy. So,
I see. So, what did you learn about the places you were in, if anything?
what did I learn? That you're being in the service, you're an ambassador to the United States. So your actions are weighed more heavily there than they are, because you're always scrutinized over there. Because you don't want to be labeled as that stupid American. You want to have a good example, a good representation of the U.S. And always try to remember their culture. Because there are some times when their culture plays a part in your life as well. When I was over at Bahrain, I'm normally left-handed. Their culture, you don't do anything with your left hand except for one thing, and that's to use the bathroom. And they don't have toilet paper. I'm left-handed. I went out with a bunch of a group of sailors from senior chiefs all the way down to E3s, and we were having lunch. Luckily, I was only eating a sandwich. But I started to eat with my left hand, and the shop owner saw me eat with my left hand, and he got the local police involved. And they have the big sitars, big, and over there, if you do anything with your left hand, they cut it off. So that way you would have to do everything normally with your right hand. So you can't shake hands, you can't do, anything like that. So when my chief saw that the owner was getting the cops, and the police officer looked over, he told me to sit on my left hand. So I had to finish my meal with my right hand. And because the police officer saw me on my right hand, he didn't have to do nothing. But I almost lost my left hand.
Oh
So,
my,
yes.
must have been very disconcerting.
Yes, but that's, you gotta pay attention to details, and you gotta make sure that you know their culture, and you gotta respect their culture.
Yeah. So, if I were to ask a fellow member of your former unit about you, what would he or she say?
Well, you defined a former member of my unit. I'd probably say I was very energetic, somewhat quiet. I stayed the course. I was a 4-row sailor, just overall good stuff. They would say I never drank, so they would never see me in the bars and stuff like that, so I was a big partier, so.
I see. So what would you say would be the most important thing that you learned in the military?
Like again, once I said, attention to details. When you're working out in an aircraft carrier, there's a lot of dangerous things to do. If you know where you're supposed to be at a particular time, or what not to touch and when to touch it, you can survive. There's always a saying in the Navy, there's the wrong way, the right way, and the Navy way, or the Navy way and the right way. If they tell you not to cross that white line during flight ops, don't cross that white line at flight ops. The rules don't change in the military until somebody dies. When someone dies, then they change the rules. So you always have to be very attentive to the details and keep your head on a swivel. Make sure that you're always watching for yourself.
All right. So, if you could, would you change anything that happened during your service?
Besides the fact of going in after college, probably the beginning part of the basic training. Doing those tests with sleep deprivation wasn't all that good. I changed that part of it. And I worked a little harder on myself to become a SEAL. I would have worked a lot harder on that aspect.
I see.
And studied more to advance in your field of endeavor.
Okay. So, as a final question, would you recommend the military life or not?
Depending on the person.
All right.
Some people, the military is not for them. Some people they are. But overall, I would recommend the military. I always recommend you going into college first. That way you come out, you have more choices for yourself. So I always still recommend, even if we're in a time of war, I would still recommend military for somebody.
I see. Thank you for your time, Mr. Masse.
Thank you.